Probably have to have a very low HOA, but you still want to do the burst strategy if you're holding, or the base, like 70% rule if you're flipping. You need to have that equity margin in those properties, especially because if it doesn't cash flow or if the HOA is poorly run, you might have to get out even if you don't want to.
Welcome to the Good Stewards Podcast, the only podcast dedicated to seasoned real estate investors who want to maximize the cash flow potential in their business. We are buy and hold investors with 1,000+ properties and markets across the U.S. who bring an insider's view into the nitty-gritty details of real estate investing. If you're looking to develop the mindset, teams, and systems that can dramatically build your real estate business and net worth, you're in the right place.
Welcome to this episode of the Good Stewards Podcast. I'm Ryan Dossie.
I'm Amanda Perkins.
I'm Bill Sirius.
And I'm Andrew Sirius. All right, everyone. We are going to do a deep dive into HOAs and condos. Don't buy them. We're done. Bye. Okay.
Hey, I want this segment.
Yeah. Okay. Well, there are actually times when it makes sense to purchase condos and properties in HOAs. In fact, some people even kind of like when there's an HOA and they prevent a friend of mine referred to preventing the purple polka dot house down the neighborhood. So if you have a house in an HOA, that's not really the biggest problem. We actually have several houses in an HOA where it's a $30 a year charge for they clean the snow off the road. So HOAs can be a very, very different beast based on which HOA we're talking about. Of course, we're talking about homeowners associations. And these things can be pretty trivial, like the $30 a year one that the house has, or they can be extremely arduous and ran by petty tyrants who wish they were, like Joseph Stalin wannabes who would just want to crush you under their boot. So there's a wide range here. Generally speaking, I would recommend being very cautious around any sort of property that has an HOA. Usually condos, those are the ones we're going to talk about the most here. There are, however, times when it makes sense to buy them. The biggest problem is not actually the petty tyrant that you have to deal with, unless you choose to run and become that petty tyrant, which is, I know, one of your major ambitions, Dad, in life is to become an HOA board chairman.
I throw my weight around at the HOA where we own a condo in Kansas City, and it's a thing of beauty.
Absolutely, it's truly inspiring. The biggest problem is just the fee. The fees can range in where I live from generally $100 a month to $500 a month. And if you get into the upper end condos, they can get into many thousands of dollars, where they're basically just trying to make it prohibitive for anyone to live there who's not just loaded. But that fee,
I think the other thing with that fee isn't just the HOA fee, but it's the special assessments of like,
yes, it's
we
a
need
combination.
A new roof.
Yes, yeah. The fee is not necessarily all that there is, but the fee itself, you have to factor in. And usually especially we're in a Midwest town, so you're going to have to affect, if you're on a coastal city, I mean, if you're in San Francisco or New York, pretty much the only thing you're going to be buying are condos or co-ops. If you're in a more Midwest, South, rural, suburban type area, those would be much more cautious around condos and HOAs. If you're in those bigger markets, your cash flow is probably not going to be there to begin with, but you might not have a choice at all. But, condos can be tempting because they're cheaper. And so they're like, oh, this is an easier foot in the door. But when you actually run the numbers, often that HOA, especially if it's much over $250 a month, will just cut your cash flow down to nothing. Because remember, buy and hold real estate, you often don't have a huge amount of cash flow per month. And yes, HOAs do pay for some things. They do pay, usually they pay for water, sewer, and trash. They'll usually pay for the exterior insurance. So you need your own insurance for the interior unit, the exterior. They usually pay for exterior capital improvements like the roof or something like that. So they usually do pay for some things, but it's not that much. And it doesn't cover the entire fee, almost without exception. And when you actually boil it down, I've had $20,000 condos that would rent for, $600. But when I took it, it had a $200 HOA fee. And when you run the numbers, the cash flow disappears. And that's before these dreaded special assessments. Ryan, why don't you jump in on that and explain the horror that is a special assessment?
So a special assessment is basically it's like a tax almost of, hey, we're out of money, or, kind of in our reserves, we don't have enough capital to do X. So therefore, we're going to divide it amongst our number of units, and you just get to pay this amount. And a lot of the times you don't really have it's not something you can be like, oh no, I'm not going to pay that. You are paying it. It is like tacked onto your property by the HOA. And a lot of people don't know this, but if you default on those, your HOA can actually foreclose on the property in some instances, like literally like a bank, if you don't pay those.
I believe
fees.
in all instances, HOAs are attached to your title report. So they have, they do fall, they can assess liens, they can come after you, they can do all kinds of things. And we've, in some of our distressed home purchases, we've dealt with delinquent HOAs and that sort of thing. And they can be friendly. They can also be very menacing. So it's part of your negotiation.
And we've also, I've seen in the state of Missouri, I think it's, by the way, state by state has different laws regarding if you can foreclose on a property that hasn't paid their HOAs. You need to look into that, what you can and can't do. It's almost worse in some states where the HOA doesn't foreclose, because then they get a lot of people that say, well, there's no real consequence to not paying your HOA dues. And I've seen HOA communities that rack up all kinds of unpaid dues. And so they're hamstrung by the assessing owners what they should be assessed and getting the kind of funds they need to do these capital improvements. And that makes it almost worse. So you really need to kind of do a deep dive into your state, that particular HOA. How healthy is it? What are they spending their money on? And a lot
of the times you can access things like financial reports and statements. The other thing to be aware of is it's not necessarily just maintenance either. My in-laws live in kind of a rural community that had a smaller HOA that decided at some board meeting that they wanted to be a gated community, and they put in a gate and keypad, and everybody got hit with the special assessment. It's one of those things of, as an investor, you have to look at what could homeowners potentially vote on that's not in our favor. Bill and I bought a single family, and we found out that the HOA made kind of some tweaks, some changes, and they pretty much made it where you could only rent the property if you were an owner occupant who fell onto hard times, effectively forcing the sale of that asset. So it's kind of one of those, like, you've got to proceed with caution at a minimum.
Well, right. And for instance, I don't know for sure if we knew that exactly going in, but in some cases you could do your diligence and it could be one way at the time that you close, and then they could vote and change things on you, and you would be subject to new rules. For instance, if they do allow rentals, and then all of a sudden they make a rule because people in the community came together and they don't want to have rentals take place, they can outlaw that. And in some cases you could be grandfathered in, but in some cases that could really change the value of your portfolio. If you can't rent it out, you'd be forced to sell it or do something. They can make changes like that if they want to.
And some are like kind of Andrew touched on, some are easier and more friendly. Others are a little bit more menacing. We've got several properties that are in nicer areas in newer builds that have HOAs that are great. And then we have other ones that are like, oh, our inspector found some blades of grass in the mulch and those need to be removed by hand. I mean, it kind of runs the gamut.
And it's kind of a Goldilocks zone you're looking for too, because that is just too arduous. But in the same time, if you've got these lackadaisical HOAs or these HOAs that are bankrupt or something like that, you will be you are basically anchored to this ship and you are going down with them. We looked at a condo that was in a really good area. It was near the plaza in Kansas City, and the price was really, really good. And we were like, if we comped it to the surrounding area, there wasn't any sales in that building. We comped it to nearby ones, and it's like this is definitely like maybe 60% market value, assuming the rehab is about what we think it will be. And the unit wasn't that bad, but the building was just in disarray. And it was clear that most of the units were vacant. One person owned most of them too, and seemingly, we don't know, but maybe was trying to drive everybody out. The roof looked like it needed work. There was a swimming pool that was down. It was just endless series of problems. And like, this is going to be one special assessment after the next. And also, who was going to want to rent this place? Who's going to want to live here? Or if we want to sell it, who's going to want to buy it? Who's going to be the bin buyer? They walk into this building, and it's just like you're walking into this building that's seemingly falling down on all sides. Even if it's in a good area, there's nothing we can do. You are anchored to the HOA. So you need it to be a good one, and you need to evaluate it going in for the thing. There's only so much you can do to try. Talking to neighbors, like, is this HOA reasonable? Are they going to be just, petty tyrants, or are they going, and do they take care of what they say they're going to? Is the building in good shape? I would ask for at least some sort of idea, something from them if you're under contract, showing how much money they have in the bank, like what their statements are, just to see, you can't guarantee you'll get it, but see if, are they healthy financially, or should you be expecting a special assessment? Actually, one thing to make sure you get is the bylaws and read through them to figure out what the rules are. One time we requested the bylaws and didn't get them, and just kind of forgot about it, closed the condo, and then we began renovate it. We list it for rent, and we get a message from, like, listen, the bylaws say you're not allowed to rent this property. Like, it's homeowners only. And I was like, oh yeah, we never received those. Fortunately, we had enough equity. We were able to sell the property and make a tiny profit. But you need to be aware of all. You need to try to figure out what the financial strength, financial situation of the HOA is, how they, like what Ryan was saying, how exactly they are, how much of a stickler they are, as well as what the rules, the bylaws of that HOA are as well.
Yeah, I would say that's especially important if you're in more of a touristy destination and you're thinking Airbnb sounds nice. I had somebody reach out to me recently who was in Honolulu and had like 8 or 9 condos, and political rulings changed. And all of a sudden, any rentals shorter than 31 days were illegal, and he had to liquidate his holdings. So you want to be particularly cautious of HOAs if you're looking at doing something like a short-term rental. And if you do a short-term rental and you're in an HOA neighborhood, you have to make sure your guests understand this, of like, the neighbors don't want to see you. They don't want to hear you. They don't even want to know this is going on. Because if you think about it, most homeowners don't want kind of just this revolving door of strangers next door. Now, there's all kinds of perks to running Airbnbs if you're in a market where it makes sense. But I would also make sure you're buying deals that make sense as long-term rentals as well.
Or at least that you can flip out of if you need to. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. You don't want to buy or build with the only exit strategy being Airbnb, right? Talk about putting all your eggs in one basket.
Yeah, that is, and I've seen in, like, here in Kansas City, they become more and more strict on Airbnb. I've seen them become more and more strict on Airbnb and short-term rentals pretty much everywhere. And it used to be kind of a gold mine, but I think, a large combination of factors. People don't want to live next to a hotel in a suburban neighborhood. And in addition, hotels don't want the competition. So you got their law, everybody, a lot of lobbying. They're being basically cornered by homeowners, many renters, some landlords, the entirety of the hospitality industry. I don't see it getting better for short-term rentals. So I think it's incredibly important to be very wary of the law and also of the HOAs, because you can get hit by both. Most homeowners associations simply prohibit short-term rentals.
I've kind of got this goal of buying property in Hawaii. It's where I was born. It's kind of always been on my list. And I had a lead come in through my website. It's probably about a year ago. Super, super nice lady, super nice condo, overlooked the water right by Pearl Harbor. And the problem was, if they didn't have an HOA, it would cash flow. Because the HOA was there, the only way we could get it to cash flow was if we could Airbnb it. And upon looking into the bylaws, they'd outlawed anything less than 31 days. So it was like, nobody in their right mind is going to come pay $600 over fair market rent in this building for me to have this unit. So it was like, okay, this isn't the one. We'll keep looking. But it's just something you want to be super cautious with. Andrew mentioned the one they didn't get the report on. The one I got was such a good deal, I decided to try to willfully ignore it. And we got a nice cease and desist letter. And we kind of had a loophole where we used it as employee housing for a little bit. And then on that note, I wouldn't recommend renting to your employees. It's real awkward when you let them go.
And for some reason, every time you rent to an employee, they immediately become terrible and you have to like fire them. And then you have your rented to your...
And then you're like, hey,
your
where's
unemployed former employee doesn't like you very much.
Pay it.
Yeah, like the one good time we had the property under rented and didn't want to increase his rent very much. So it's just kind of like, I would just avoid that.
Yeah. So we tried it. We had our little loophole, and then we let him go. So it was like, okay, we're going to just sell this thing. But because we'd gotten such a good deal, and it was kind of a nicer, newer Vinyl Village-y thing, it's like, all right, we should come out ahead on this. If our only exit we really thought was to rent it, if we'd been all in for more than 75% of what it was worth, be a different situation of, well, maybe I can get out of this one whole, which, you can't go broke making a profit, but you can go broke losing money.
Yeah. And I would say whenever you're buying a condo, I mean, the basic rules of it are the same as buying houses. The property should cash flow on your sheet, when you work it out, when run the numbers. So generally speaking, if you're going to hold it, it's going to have a fairly low HOA. Maybe that's different in San Francisco and New York, assuming it's even possible to have a cash flowing property that has debt on it. Or one that doesn't have debt, and I'm not even sure about that. But probably have to have a very low HOA. But you still want to do the BRRRR strategy if you're holding, or the 70% rule if you're flipping. You need to have that equity margin in those properties, especially because if it doesn't cash flow, or if the HOA is poorly run, you might have to get out even if you don't want to. And so you definitely need to have that escape hatch. And one of the things probably our most interesting deal, I'll just kind of move into this with condos, the one we did not want to buy. It was literally half an apartment complex, basically upper end apartment complex. It was 17 condos in a complex of 35 units. The guy had condoized it around 2007, which was a big fad then, and shockingly didn't work out very well for many of the people doing it. So he got stuck with them after 2008 and held on to them, and eventually just had an apartment complex basically, and then started selling them one by one and got sick of it. And so he sold half of them, and he's like, I just want to dump the rest of them. And so they send this to me. It was listed about market. And I'm thinking, this is garbage. I'm not interested. Basically told them that more kindly. Again, be sensitive. But once we had then they just dropped the price to the floor, and we negotiated a little bit further. And it was like, the units were rented. They were in good shape. There wasn't much to do there. I ran the numbers. It's like, this is barely going to make like it will just barely cash flow. And if we have a special assessment, we probably are going to lose that year, maybe the next year too. But we have a very large equity margin in it. And so, okay, it makes sense. We bought it. It was a little bit like probably our weirdest deal. It was kind of one of the ones where it's like, I don't want this. And they just twist your arm. Okay, fine. You've made me purchase this by continuously dropping your price, which is on another side note, not being a motivated buyer gives you opens up opportunities and properties you don't want. Often you can get for far less than you would think. But it does.
It's kind of like the I don't care attitude when dating.
Yes, exactly. Just be completely indifferent. This is the good stewards dating advice. Be completely indifferent. Make sure that you never show any sort of emotion or positivity or any sort of...
Be willing to walk away at the moment's notice, the drop of a hat, all of that.
No matter how long you've been together, just boom.
Bill actually wrote a marriage
I think it's titled "Make Sure to Never Show Any Affection Under Any Circumstance."
How to End Up in Marriage Counseling 101 by Bill Serious.
Yeah. Negotiating to buy condos is slightly different than relationships. I think we can settle on that.
Just to mention my book again, it's one that my kids have never read, so I'm just thankful for that. But you can search online and find it, I'm sure.
It has intimacy in the title, so I don't blame them for not picking up a signed
Intimate
copy.
Conversations for Couples. Okay, so hey, one thing I would say about condos to redirect us here slightly. In a downturn, I would say condos are the first thing that get hit. And they're probably the most sensitive because they're a little bit less attractive. Of course, this depends on where you live. If you're living in an area that's only condos and every homeowner pretty much is in a condo, this may be different. But in an area that there are a lot of single families and some condo communities, if the downturn hits when the downturn hits again, I think condo prices are more sensitive to the downward side. So
what do
that's
you
another
think
cautionary
is
tale.
the driving factor with that? Because it does seem to be true, but I'm wondering what makes the condo prices, what makes them less of a good deal? Is it the fee?
Well, I think that's part of it. I think when you pull back everything from the most attractive place to live, it still is a single family residence for most people. And they want the benefits of having a yard and independence and from
I think
others.
it comes down to typically condo sales, especially in the Midwest, where they do really well, are in nicer areas where people are priced out of single family homes. And I think when you have an economic downturn, like those are the folks that feel it the most. So they're trying to be in the area that they really can't afford. And the people that are looking to move into that area that can afford this or afford that area are kind of just like, yeah, no, at least in my experience from what I've seen.
Yeah, I think it also, I think there's a lot of factors. I think there's some people who are more on the margins and condos. They're generally cheaper than houses. I think banks are more hesitant to lend on condos. I think, they take into account the HOA, and so they reduce the amount of the value you can get. Plus, they're just not as, we've had banks say we're not interested in condos. We have banks who've put a package of 10 houses in one condo in front of them. Like, we're not doing the condo. And I'd be like, you got to take the good with the bad sometimes. Okay. And so, and I also think there's markets are more tend to be flooded. Go back to that 17. One of the big concerns we have with this, it is not an easy portfolio to liquidate. We have a lot of equity because each condo is worth by itself what the market will bear. But the reason we got such a good deal on it was because we bought it as a portfolio, and there aren't really any buyers for that. Big hedge funds aren't interested in 17 condos. Small investors can't afford it or are kind of scared off by it. And it's not actually that liquid. We could sell it. We could sell it in the same way we bought it and probably break even or maybe make a tiny profit if we were a little bit more patient. But we cannot sell it for what it's worth because each condo would have to be sold separately. And if we put them all on the market at the same time, we've flooded the market. And so we'd have to put them on one or two at a time and really slowly liquidate the portfolio over the course of probably 2 to 3 years. 2 years probably, I think, is how long it would take. Now, if you have an economic downturn, and lots of properties are going to come on, you're going to have a lot more of a heterogeneous group of houses than you are going to have of condos. And so,
for those of us that don't,
I don't think I pronounced it correctly. So we'll switch around. The condos will be more homogeneous, namely more similar. So you have 7 of the exact same thing on the market. When the houses you have this raised ranch and you have this slightly smaller regular ranch and you have a bungalow and you have this duplex and the one thing, a slightly different neighborhood.
Appealing to different people in the
Whereas
market.
You have the same exact thing, especially when you have an economic downturn, people are getting foreclosed on. People are getting, properties going down, or an entire complex goes down, which is rarely happens with the suburb or anything like that, or a subdivision of houses or things like that.
Really, the other thing specifically, like in this package of condos, they're mostly 1 and 2 bedroom condos. That's not to sell them, what you'd be looking for would be probably like professionals that aren't looking to take care of yard, that sort of things. Definitely families can live in them, but not large families. And oftentimes families aren't wanting to purchase something in a condo if they have small children. It's basically the same as living in an apartment. And, if they have to, yes, but you don't have as broad of a pool to choose from when you're selling.
Yeah, people are usually looking to rent when a downturn hits rather than buy. There's not a lot of people who get enthusiastic when the dark clouds of recession hover over, their purchasing decisions. So that's a time people get conservative. And so why not just rent an apartment down the street than buy a condo kind of thing? So again,
I will say on the condo note, if you're doing marketing, these are great to market to. I don't know what it is, but I think newer fix and flippers, especially if you're in a nicer area, love condos. Condos have been some of our easiest deals to wholesale or wholesale. Kind of similar to Andrew, they typically don't really cash flow. They don't really make sense for us. But on a marketing standpoint of turning and monetizing those, I would say we have bidding wars on condos more than anything else, because it's a relatively easy project. They don't have to worry about the exterior. It's literally all interior. And we've watched some people make some pretty good money on them as well. So if you are doing direct to seller marketing, I wouldn't rule them out. Just because you don't want it as a rental doesn't mean you can't sell it to somebody else who wants to flip it, or sell it to somebody else who wants it.
Condos are also incredibly easy. Not always, but usually are incredibly easy to value. Like houses can be tricky because there's nothing, you have to make similar houses nearby the same and figure out the sale price. If there's any sales in the same condo complex in the last year of the same size unit, you've kind of got what the,
pretty easy to go like to like.
Now, if there's no sales anywhere near, that could be tricky, but that's pretty rare. And that also kind of tells you something like, why has there been no sales in this area, or especially if it's a large complex. But that might bring in flippers too. It's like, this is not a hard project. It's pretty easy to budget how much it's going to cost, and I know what I can sell it for. And so that even if the margin is a little bit smaller, I mean, I'm speculating a bit here because we don't really flip condos other than when we forget to demand the bylaws. We don't really flip condos. But I'm speculating and getting in their head a little bit, but I suspect a lot of that is because it is pretty easy to value them, and they are less rehab. And so there are some advantages to HOAs. I mean, that's one of them. You also they do take care of some things. We do want to stress that they do pay for some of the utilities. Usually they do pay for the exterior maintenance and capital improvements when they're not charging you a special assessment to do so. And they also do prevent, the purple polka dots and things like that down the street that can be a bit of a property value drain. Is there any, we are approaching the end here. We've flown through that. Are there any other last comments, last thoughts on HOAs, condos, co-ops, those things?
I think one thing I would highlight is that what we're talking about are primarily like B+, A- condos. These are not like high-end luxury penthouses. We are talking about decently priced inventory in good areas. So, like Andrew mentioned, I can't count the number of condos that have called me to try to sell me a $19,000 condo in a 12 unit, building that are just like the worst of the worst as far as resident pool goes. I would say what we're talking about here that makes sense of look into these and run the cash flow analysis in particular is if you're in good areas, B+ and pretty well maintained buildings, and you have a deal that comes up, it's worth looking at. It's significantly harder to do if you're in like C-, D. Think of kind of like an apartment complex, like a rougher apartment complex where people own, so the HOA can't evict them, right? They can kind of do whatever they want.
And you have no control over it. So
correct.
You've got
we get a lot of calls on those, particularly on the east side of Indianapolis. And it's kind of like, you couldn't pay me to buy your property. It's just, it doesn't make sense. So, I think this is much more of what we're recommending you look into is on the upper end of spectrum as far as areas go, where you may be able to get a little bit of a pricing break because it is a condo and has an HOA. this is really not like a war zone strategy in my experience.
Yeah, I mean, we've gotten a few cheaper condos than that, but that was really 5-6 years ago when we could buy a condo for $20,000. That was probably at least in a B. I think we have a couple in a B- areas, but that's probably where I draw the line. And yeah, I'd prefer, we really would want them in better areas, and those few and far between that have low HOAs in solid and good areas are the ones worth holding. But of course, there are ones worth flipping and wholesaling and stuff like that. I would say properties with, especially condos, houses with HOAs, it's just factored into your price, and be careful, make sure the HOA is in good shape and not too tyrannical. But with condos and co-ops, I really would recommend, probably, this is not a strategy. Like, unless you're a flipper in a high end market, like New York or something like that, I don't see condos and co-ops being a strategy. I see it being like, when they come along, don't not mail to them because they're condos, but like, it should be a component of an overall strategy, not the strategy itself, unless, again, you are in a really high-end market that's really expensive and really dominated by condos and co-ops.
Well, and I think just to highlight on the one you guys did, those 17 units out of 35 means anything that comes up, y'all can pretty much
have
down,
complete total
right?
control of that HOA.
I mean, every single occupant would have to decide not to watch Netflix, to show up to the dumb meeting, to vote totally against you guys, for you guys to lose. So I think that's one of the appeals to that, of things like upgrades or special assessments. I mean, if I were the HOA, I would absolutely.
We've been pretty good, but yeah.
as an investor, you can just be like, yeah, no,
it's a democracy, but some people are more equal than others, and
it's like a monarchy.
And also, those properties are in a good
Bill as
area
the
too.
head.
I think that's also worth noting. But yeah, I think, see it as a component of your strategy, not as the overall strategy. Again, unless you're flipping in high-end markets. We have passed the 30-minute mark. I think we've gotten everything we need to get in about HOAs. Again, please check us out on thegoodstewards.com. Check out our free ebook. And thank you very much for joining us. We will see you next time.